Há 10 anos nascia o WikiLeaks, a mais poderosa e inexpugnável máquina de divulgação de segredos de Estado de que se tem notícia em todos os tempos. E há 4 anos está aqui, nesse pequeno prédio do centro de Londres, onde funciona a Embaixada do Equador, o criador dessa máquina, o australiano Julian Assange. Assange está exilado na Embaixada do Equador, a poucos metros da Harrods, paraíso mundial dos turistas que vêm aqui para fazer compras. Nós vamos entrar agora na Embaixada para fazer uma entrevista exclusiva com Julian Assange para o Nocaute. Venha conosco. Bom, em primeiro lugar, muito obrigado pela deferência de ter me recebido aqui. É uma honra estar com o senhor, apesar das circunstâncias. O senhor deve saber que os netos dos netos, dos seus netos, e os netos dos meus netos, os seus na Austrália, os meus no Brasil, vão ler nos livros de história daqui a 100 anos que o responsável pela eleição do Trump para a presidência dos Estados Unidos foi o senhor. Não importa que isso não seja verdade. Isso vale para o livro de história, sim. Como é que o senhor se sente?
Well, I think there's a lot of naivety about what it means to have one president or another. Okay, Trump was elected. He appointed Rex Tillerson, Secretary of State. Rex Tillerson is the CEO of Exxon, but who has been the second most frequent visitor to the White House for the last eight years under Barack Obama. It is Exxon. What was Hillary Clinton doing in her time as Secretary of State? One of the primary things she was doing is pushing US oil interests. So I think we shouldn't be too naive about the spokesperson or the symbol or the symbolic manager. It's gone from prospectively Hillary Clinton to Donald Trump. Okay, so the US government is going to commit all sorts of crimes against its own people and against people internationally. It will commit many grave errors and it will commit a lot of crimes intentionally. It always has, because ultimately it represents the dominant organized factions of US society, which is its biggest multinational companies. The question is, what type of symbol is there that represents this phenomenon? Okay. With Rex Tillerson at the helm of the State Department, a critique, you're just engaging in this type of foreign policy for your oil companies, suddenly is very easy to make. It was harder when when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State. A critique that any aspect of this new Trump administration is engaged in crony capitalism, doing dodgy deals for friends, just serving the interests of the billionaire class, is a very easy critique to make. But if we go back and look at the Obama cabinet, there are nearly all tens of millionaires in the Obama cabinet. Okay, there's billionaires in the Trump cabinet, but there are tens of millionaires in the Obama cabinet. So I'm not sure things are so different, and in some ways, rhetorically, the situation is a lot easier. Additionally, Trump has destabilized what was a increasing consolidation of neoliberal power under the Obama administration heading into the Clinton. So that consolidation has been disturbed, and a new patronage group is trying to emerge, is trying to be born in that Trump cabinet. But it has a lot of enemies. It has most of the press, for example, in the United States as its enemy. It has that existing patronage structure under Barack Obama that has to somehow find a new path to swap over. So it has destabilized the existing power networks. Trump has put a lot of people who are billionaires and who are quite strong characters in that cabinet. Why do people become billionaires? Part of the reason they become billionaires is they don't want to work for anyone else. Will people with that mindset, will they work for Donald Trump? It's a very interesting question. So at the moment you have a loose structure of independent, for the most part, personalities within this Trump cabinet. Over time, some will be ejected and others will start to cohere into a solid power structure. But for quite a while, maybe a year or two, there's a lot of opportunities to change the perception of what the US government does and to get some real change out of this in some areas. For example, US foreign policy. It's clear there's going to be changes, some for the worse, some for the better. So I wouldn't, yes, there will be all sorts of crimes committed by a Trump government. There definitely would have been the same sorts of crimes, for the most part, committed under a Hillary Clinton government. But the process is a lot more visible under Trump government, and the domestic criticism within the United States will be a lot more intense. Let's imagine that there's another attempted war for oil somewhere. Okay. Well, who will oppose it internationally? Well, if you look at the structure of European society, for the most part, it will be a lot easier to get up a criticism from Europe against such a US-backed war than if Hillary Clinton was conducting the war. So if you are a victim country, you can get international support more easily if the Trump administration is trying to take over your country for the purposes of oil than if the Clinton administration was doing so. Similarly, domestically, you might want to gain domestic opposition to such a war. Well, the New York Times and so on, they are, for a variety of reasons, they are offside with the Trump administration. So is CNN. So 4 of the 5 major media conglomerates in the United States. We'll see if they do some deal down the track, but at the moment the majority are campaigning against the Trump administration. So it's easier to get domestic resistance to such a policy. Then there is an isolationist strand within this new Trump cabinet. Now, probably that isolationist strand will decay over time. Probably the CIA and the military-industrial complex will start to get to it. Exxon and Chevron and other countries, other big companies with interests overseas will demand, no, please do this. The arms companies will say, we need to boost our arms sales. People need to see our fighter jet bombing something, otherwise they won't buy it. So over time, that will happen. But for the moment, it is very easy to get up a critique inside the United States and outside the United States for anything seriously dangerous that Trump administration does. So it's not all bad. If I may summarize, it is if you were a farmer, it is easier when the wolf does not have the cover of the sheep.
Que evidências WikiLeaks tem do envolvimento internacional na derrubada da presidente Dilma Rousseff no Brasil?
We haven't published any direct. We've published quite a lot about the players involved, and how they behave historically, including President Temer and a number of people in his cabinet. Most of those come from their dealings with the US Embassy, going into the US Embassy and briefing the US Embassy, trying to lobby the US Embassy to support one party or another, one policy or another.
Na sua opinião, o que houve no Brasil foi processo de impeachment ou golpe de Estado século XXI?
It's somewhere between the two, right? It's a constitutional coup, or political coup is what you would call it.
Existe alguma evidência concreta do que é que a Agência Nacional de Segurança...
Interestingly, I just pause for a moment. There's, in Australia, which is my home country, there is a forgotten coup of a very similar type to what has happened with Dilma and Temer in Brazil. That happened in 1975, and quite a similar process where there was a Labour government, a left-ish government that was in power for 2 years, hadn't been in power for quite some time before, and the business sector and the intelligence sector, aligned with the United States and Great Britain, got together and used a constitutional trick to overthrow the government and install the opposition.
À luz do que o WikiLeaks tornou público, é possível identificar exatamente o que a Agência Nacional de Segurança dos Estados Unidos pretendia ao fazer espionagem e gravação de telefones no Brasil?
Our publications, Bugging Brazil, we published not simply that the NSA was spying on this company or this person, but rather the full chain of targeting. So that is what basis there is for the collection activity. So if you think about it, the National Security Agency, they don't decide policy. The US National Security Agency, it does the spying. It hacks into satellites, it puts bugs on fiber optic cables, etc. So it's operational and not at the policy level. The policy level is what is now the DNI, the Director of National Intelligence. And so it sets overall priorities about what the United States wants to gather. And then that is pushed out to the National Security Agency, to the CIA, to the National Reconnaissance Office, etc., and pulls that information back. So in our publications you can see that one particular cabinet minister or Petrobras or the president is targeted for economic reasons or for political reasons, because those are the reasons listed in terms of their assignments. So for Brazil it is a mixture. There's a mixture between political affairs, understanding the politics of Brazil, which way it wants to head, who it likes, who it doesn't like, and understanding Brazil's economy.
Is there evidence concerning who were the informants? And there you can see there's a conversation that we printed that WikiLeaks leaked about Vice President Temer.
Well, in this publication, Bugging Brazil, we detail the telephone numbers, the information need. This is the policy directive of the United States, why they want the information, and this information need explainer, which is a summary of why they want the information. So this is spy on Dilma for political reasons, political president's office, many presidential secretaries, etc. You can see it's for political reasons, this for understanding the finance and developments in finance across different countries. So there's a mixture, and occasionally for military purposes, so spying on the Brazilian military. But everyone knows that that's what intelligence agencies do. What is interesting about this is the degree of political and economic and financial targeting. I mean, it's not just a small part of the activity. In fact, if you break down the budgets of the National Security Agency, it is about 50% of all its activity is to understand where a country or a president or a cabinet is heading politically and financially, so the United States can react to steer it in a particular direction, including in relation to its major energy companies.
O WikiLeaks divulga 1 milhão de documentos por ano e o senhor certamente não terá possibilidade de guardar tudo isso na memória. Mas o que se sabe a partir da papelada do WikiLeaks sobre as relações do então vice-presidente da República do Brasil, Michel Temer, com organismos de inteligência estrangeiros, particularmente norte-americanos?
Well, we published several cables that mention him. One in particular is from January 2006, where he goes into the US Embassy. The cable is only about the information provided by Michael Temer. And is a rundown on Brazilian politics and what's happening and what his party's strategy is and so on. So that shows a degree of comfort with the US Embassy that I think is a bit concerning. What's coming back the other direction? Clearly, giving the US Embassy inside information is done for a reason. It's probably to curry favour with the United States, perhaps to get information back in the other direction. Several times he has gone into the US Embassy to speak. The cable we published in January is only about his communications. Frequently the US Embassy writes a cable back about some issue and it consults with a number of different informers that it has and other parties and pulls that together. So yeah, Temer has repeatedly provided information to his embassy, but so have others within his cabinet, and so had others within PT. So I think personally, given the nature of the relationship between Brazil and the United States, and the maneuvering of the US State Department to maximize the interests of Chevron and ExxonMobil, it's providing the United States political intelligence, inside political intelligence on what is happening politically in Brazil. And with that information, the US State Department can maneuver itself and the interests of its major oil companies, which are not necessarily aligned with the interests of Brazil. So it depends a little bit on how you choose to run your society. You could choose to say that anyone can go into any embassy and tell any foreign government any inside information. But most societies that survive have rules against that. They have rules that you can't take delicate political information and give it to a competitive state.
And there he also says that he's unhappy with the more neoliberal, with the anti-neoliberal politics of PT and wishes to align with PSDB, who he is aligned with.
Now, which is now aligned with. Yeah.
So
it's been a long. I mean, if you look at the cable from 2006, it's been the current situation. It's been a long time in the making. What I suppose is very interesting is how much the positionality of the players, their worldview and who their allies are, hasn't changed. In fact, it's gone back to that description.
O senhor deve saber que o Brasil descobriu há alguns anos uma jazida de petróleo a 7.000 metros de profundidade, abaixo da camada de sal, que pode nos transformar numa potência petroleira internacional. E o pré-sal, o óleo tirado do pré-sal, mesmo que um barril de petróleo caia a $8, o pré-sal ainda é economicamente viável. Qual o interesse que os Estados Unidos, o que houve, que se pode provar da interferência norte-americana, sobretudo da participação de Michel Temer nessa espionagem sobre o pré-sal no Brasil?
We have published a number of documents about the pre-salt oil finds off the coast of Brazil. The deposits are viewed to be something like 4 times the Brazilian existing deposits, so they're extremely significant. It's quite expensive to get down to the ocean through the salt, to the rock, to get them. But once you get them, the oil doesn't need much refinery, there's not much sulfur in it. So it's quite profitable from that point on. Well, the existing condition was that Petrobras would have 30% guaranteed revenue stream from the pre-salt oils. And various oil-related interests were going to the US Embassy and complaining about this condition. So some of the political parties in Brazil were speaking about that and saying that they would prefer that Chevron and Exxon Mobil have access with no exclusivity, even at 30% for Petrobras. Okay, so this is actually very interesting argument. What is the best way for Brazil to license its oil deposits that best benefits the people of Brazil? And the basic argument is along these lines. If the state is to run in a coherent way when it is in competition with other states and large transnational corporations, then it needs some kind of revenue, and oil is a strong revenue stream that can empower the state. Okay. And on the other side of the equation, there's the argument, but if there's one company that, even if it's owned by the state, that has preferential access, then it will get lazy, and it won't be very good at drilling oil because it will have no competition. Okay, so these are the basic arguments. Also along here, that if there's too much competition in drilling the oil, then the price will come down too much, and the state won't get as much in terms of licensing fees. So if you look at the cable that we published from December 2009, and there has been some reportage on it already, but I think not the most interesting part. To my mind, the most interesting part is an admission that the most profit to the government would come if Petrobras had 30% rights. So that is an admission. And does the US Embassy claim that the most profit to the Brazilian state would occur if Petrobras had this 30%? Okay. Because Chevron and the other big US oil companies would say, if Petrobras gets 30%, it's not worth it to us. Okay, it's not worth for us to actually do the drilling. We could just be involved in the financing. Okay. But Gazprom and the Chinese oil company, Sino Oil, they would be able to outbid Chevron and Exxon. They would give more money because they can take less profit. Why? Because the Chinese just want the oil. They actually don't care about the profit. they can break even. And so they are willing to give Brazil more money. And therefore, the Chinese, under such arrangement, and other state-based oil companies will always be able to outbid Exxon, which has $269 billion a year revenue, so it's still a very big company. So I think it's very interesting about this question as to Petrobras really is a question about what type of state Brazil wants. Does it want a strong state, or does it want a very weak state that has major foreign oil companies and transnationals taking control of the central resource? You can perhaps look at another way, which I don't think anyone has looked at in Brazil, which is, what are the strong Brazilian state institutions? What is the strongest? I think it's the military and Petrobras. I think these are very strong state institutions in Brazil, and I think in comparison, all the other state institutions are weak. So if you marginalize Petrobras, you are relatively empowering the military as a center of gravity of state organization. So I think that could be a problem. Of course, there's two reasons why this has been done in relation to the pre-salts. Number one is domestic politics. It is that Petrobras is considered to be allied to PT because of Dilma was there, because she's put her people there, and because Dilma's policy benefited Petrobras and her future policy benefited Petrobras. So institutionally, Petrobras feels that its interests are best served by PT. So that makes the other parties want to reduce its power by taking revenue away from it. Then this is a way that you can curry favor with the United States, is to make it easier for Chevron and ExxonMobil to get access to some of that oil, and that's what's spoken about in our cables, the constant desire by those US oil companies to get access that Petrobras has. So you can curry favor with Americans that way. Now, there's different philosophical traditions on how you run a state. Okay. So what about state capitalism? Because that's what Petrobras is. It's state capitalism, where you have a company structure which is controlled at the organizational level by the state. What's the difference between that type of control and the control that comes from laws and deals? You have to give us a certain percent in order to have this extraction right. You're not allowed to act in a certain way, or your company gets fined, or your people get prosecuted. These are all elements of control. And so what has broadly happened since the early 80s, probably since the early 70s in the developed countries, probably since the mid-80s in developing countries, is that there's been a shift to how you regulate institutions. But that only works if the system of regulation is uncorruptible and the system of legislation is uncorruptible. Then it doesn't matter who controls the institution, you control the laws. But that only works if you can enforce the laws and detect when the laws are being broken. And we know in the oil sector there is so much money that becomes impossible. Already we have a very corrupt Brazilian parliament, with a number of hundreds of Brazilian parliamentarians having been investigated for one form of corruption or another. So if you permit Chevron or Exxon or Gazprom or Sino Oil to earn billions of dollars from Brazil, why not take 10 million and give this as a bribe? This is nothing when tens of billions of dollars are at stake. So this is a very interesting question about how you regulate very wealthy organizations in your society, like oil companies, and what do you want the dominant features of the state to be? Do you want to balance the military maybe with oil? Is there another way to balance it?
O senhor acredita que o assédio dos Estados Unidos à Venezuela, que já dura 15 anos, teria as mesmas razões por trás disso? Estaria a questão do petróleo?
At least some of the pressure in Venezuela comes from the interests of US oil companies. And if you look overall at the US State Department's activities, and we can look overall because we publish so many cables, something like 1 in 10 cables is about oil. Now Rex Tillerson, who is the CEO of ExxonMobil, has been appointed by Trump to be the Secretary of State coming in. And you see lots of Democrats in the United States going, oh no, this is terrible, there's an oil man now head, this is this crony, corrupt multinationals taking over the government. But it was always like that. Now it's just naked when you see someone like Rex Tillerson, CEO of Exxon. What do I mean by that? Well, we can see it from the cables. The State Department is constantly engaged in trying to get good deals, to manipulate on behalf of Chevron and Exxon. Under the Obama administration, who was the number one visitor to the White House? A lobbyist for Google. Okay, number one. Who was the number 2 visitor to the White House? Visits about once a week on average. A lobbyist for Exxon. So the US government has always represented the most organized forces in the society, the most wealthy organized forces. And so those are the major companies, and traditionally that's been oil companies or companies like Lockheed Martin, and now we're moving into a situation where it's companies like Google and Facebook as well.
Voltando à questão do Brasil, do Michel Temer, a página dele no WikiLeaks, ele se dirige algumas vezes a uma pessoa que não se pode identificar. Era uma conversa privada com um oficial norte-americano? Quantas vezes isso aconteceu e o que isso sugere?
Michel Temer had private meetings at the US Embassy to give them political intelligence that not many had access to, discussing what the political dynamics were in Brazil. This is not to say that he is a paid spy of the American government. I don't know, but there is no evidence that I have seen that he is a paid spy in terms of cash.
Yes.
Okay. We're talking about something else. We're talking about making a good relationship so that there can be information exchange from one side to the other side and political support down the track.
Há uma outra passagem vazada por WikiLeaks, que é uma palestra da secretária de Estado Hillary Clinton para o Banco Itaú, nos Estados Unidos, em que ela fala de fronteiras livres. Seria isso um prenúncio de um apoio dela ao golpe no Brasil?
In October, we published Hillary Clinton's secret paid speeches, transcripts and some excerpts that her campaign staff were worried about would be made public. Bernie Sanders and others had been calling for over a year that these things should become public. She kept them secret, and this was actually a holy grail of journalism in the United States, to get hold of these things, and we didn't publish them. So lots of interesting material in there about what her position is when she's speaking to Goldman Sachs, when she's speaking to Brazilian investment banks. So she's an ultra neoliberal. I mean, that's her position. Hawkish in relation to expanding the US empire. Hungry to cement neoliberalism and big new treaty changes such as the TPP or the TTIP, is quite strategic realignments in order to do two things: to give US multinationals what they want, and to encircle China to make it harder for China to rise. So I don't know what her statements are reflecting directly on Petrobras. She was speaking about energy, though. So it's in the context of energy, her statements to that Brazilian investment bank, that she wants complete free flow of energy products.
Logo depois que termina a chamada Primavera Árabe, dois movimentos de rua muito fortes surgem, um no Brasil e um na Turquia. No Brasil, a popularidade da presidente Dilma, que era de 80%, caiu para menos de 30%. Na Turquia, acabou numa tentativa de golpe militar contra o presidente Erdogan. E no Brasil acabou num golpe. O senhor vê relação entre as duas coisas, Turquia e Brasil, sendo induzidas por uma força exterior?
Not between Turkey and Brazil. I think they're different. Maybe in the counter coup in Brazil was populist in nature. If there's a broader question on use of social media, which on the one hand is permitting a non-industrialized culture to emerge organically, unpredictably, uncontrollably, permitting political leaders to eclipse the middle and speak directly to the mass, as Erdogan is doing, as Trump is doing. That is cutting out the censorship and influence of organized mediums owned by the big families, the big media conglomerates. And then that effect is, having been seen, is being addressed by organizations that specialize on setting up hundreds or thousands of robots on the internet to push a particular message, to make it appear that it is an organic phenomenon, but actually is a programmed phenomenon. I'll give you an example. In Bahrain in 2011, we published a lot of information about Bahrain. It was at the time of the Arab Spring, and the Bahrainis rose up, at least the Shiite Bahrainis, who are the majority of the population, and they are very popular on Twitter. And then within about a year, the Bahraini regime had hired a number, I've seen the number put at 10, different PR companies, mostly Western PR companies, and suddenly there were many Twitter accounts and Facebook accounts and even websites posting pro-regime propaganda and spreading it.
In Brazil it was a bit different because since the left was in power, these populist right-wing messages were somehow supported by the mainstream media, which is owned only by 5 families. And what we saw in 2013 was quite different from what has happened in Brazilian history, which is the emergence of a right-wing, which is not afraid of saying they're right-wing, and quite xenophobic and leftophobic, which is a new phenomenon in Brazil, as if imported from the United States in a sense. And
genuine populism always can be moved against authority, where there's a medium that can express it, because authority is perceived by its ability to arrest people, tax people, and to lead in that respect. And when free criticism can flourish of the harshest type, it undermines the perception of authority. So that is something that happened in Dilma's case, but wasn't purely organic. There's an organic component. Another component was pushed by these 5 media companies and probably by robots. Actually, I have seen evidence of also pushed by robots. I'm not sure who controlled them, if that was discovered in the end, but also pushed by social media robots. Yeah, we are just at the very beginning of this phenomenon, where many people now have the ability to publish. Okay, so that changes the power dynamic, because our existing societies, a lot of their power dynamic is based upon censorship, preventing the majority of the population being able to publish, or at least publish in a way that spreads to many people. That is starting to change. Do you know whether you are dealing with a robot? Do you know whether you're dealing with a genuine person, or is it some system that has some human beings in it, and each human being controls 1,000 robots, and that's what you're actually interacting with? So it's the invention of a fake demos. So why do revolutions happen in squares very frequently? There's a Winter Palace, shipyards, or Tahrir Square. Why do they always happen in squares? It's because in a square you can see what the popular will is. You look around, you can see the people. Why do you need a square to do that? Surely, if the people were not in the square and the media was fairly reporting what the popular will was, you would have the revolution anyway. Well, it's because the communications channels don't report what the popular will is, so you don't have that same perception. It is the perception of what the majority will is that defines whether something is politically possible. So when there's a revolution, it is often in a square, like Tahrir Square or the Winter Palace, because people can see that they have the numbers. Why don't they see that they have the numbers when they're not in the square? Because the media system is suppressing the reality of what people think, and so they cannot perceive the demos. So now we must enter into with everyone being able to speak on the internet in one way or another, the antidote to this is to create a fake demos. It's too simple just to censor people. It becomes too hard. You're not worried ultimately as a political power whether you're censoring people. What you're worried about is the perception that you have the numbers, that you have the popular will behind you. So to achieve that effect, you can create a fake demos, and that's what's since about 2011, where states and political parties have been moving towards. This is a new type of manufacturing of consent. We're familiar with the old type, which is the big media oligarchs. But once you have social media, you need a new type of manufacturing consent. And that is to manufacture the appearance of a democratic will.
O senhor viu, se pode identificar a mão dos Estados Unidos nas manifestações de rua do Brasil?
I have seen that there are a number of robots used online to help stimulate those protests. But looking at what US programs are, such things don't happen in Latin America without the US supporting financially, logistically, through intelligence, either at the moment or the players that come together. That's if you read our publications, you'll see that happens again and again and again. And Brazil is a country that is of intense interest. In fact, if you look at the amount of its spying on different Latin American countries and other countries, and it is the country in Latin America with the most spying by the United States. And that's very interesting, because naively you would say it must be Venezuela or Cuba, because these historically have seemed the most adversarial publicly to the United States. No, it is Brazil.
No.
Why is it Brazil? Brazil has a bigger economy. Brazil's simply more economically important. And that's one of the factors in the economy.
Agora, no Brasil, jovenzinho de 16 anos, 17 anos, disse que fraudou uma eleição num município pequeno, no trajeto entre a saída do voto da máquina de votar até o tribunal, que o hacker entra e pode mudar. Tudo isso para dizer para o senhor o seguinte, perguntar para o senhor o seguinte: o senhor acredita que a democracia, como nós conhecemos, pode ser fraudada pela internet?
I was a teenage computer hacker and then became a security consultant and a cryptographic engineer. So I use that knowledge to keep WikiLeaks and our sources safe. We exist within a community of similar people. For a long time, I and others in that community for 20 years have said that electronic voting machines are dangerous. Okay. The manufacturers will argue, no, they're not dangerous. In fact, they increase the accuracy of the vote, because it is harder to tamper with a complex machine than it is for a simple ballot box. Okay. The issue is this. Yes, it's true. It is harder to tamper with a complex machine than a simple ballot box. But when you tamper with a simple ballot box, you affect how many votes, maybe a few hundred. When you tamper with the code that runs these machines, or the computer that they report back to, you can affect hundreds of thousands or millions of votes, and you can do it in a way that is almost completely undetectable. So that's the basic problem. And you go, okay, but fine, we can have auditors that can audit these machines and look inside them and check that they're all okay, etc. We can have two lots of auditors, etc. The reality is, governments like to cut costs, and auditors get lazy. So over time, the auditing decreases. This is a very interesting philosophical problem, which is any machine which is very complex, almost no one can determine that it is doing what it is claimed to be doing. So for something like voting, which has is an intense quest for power, ultimately, where the motivations are very strong. The average person needs to be able to see that it is doing what it is claimed to do, and nothing that is complex, the average person can understand that it is doing what it's meant to do. And this is why electronic voting machines are dangerous.
No auge da Guerra Fria, o cardeal húngaro József Midzenti passou 15 anos dentro da embaixada dos Estados Unidos em Budapeste, porque estava sendo perseguido pelo governo pró-soviético. O senhor está preparado para viver aqui na Embaixada do Equador? O senhor já está aqui há 4 anos. O senhor está preparado para viver aqui na Embaixada do Equador por quanto tempo?
It's not relevant about how long I'm prepared to stay. The question is, will the United States obey its own laws and drop its attempted prosecution against me and potentially against other members of WikiLeaks as well? That's when will the US Department of Justice obey the law, its own laws, the US Constitution, the First Amendment, even its internal regulation that it shouldn't be prosecuting publishers? Then there's a question, when will the United Kingdom and Sweden obey the law? The United Nations found on the 5th of February this year that both were acting illegally to keep me here in this embassy through threat of arrest, detaining me effectively without charge in this country for 6 years. So when will they obey the law? Recently the United Nations reaffirmed that decision and said, we looked into it again, and the situation is still ongoing and it is still illegal. When will they obey the law? I find it very ironic that you have a publisher, WikiLeaks, which is accused of being radical and revolutionary. And what does this publisher say? People should obey the law, not act corruptly, be honest, be open, be transparent. It is in some ways so simple and Christian, even conservative, this vision. And we say that these states should just obey their own laws. It's not such a strong demand. And what do those people who oppose us say? Even though the law says that you can publish this, no, you mustn't. We will corrupt our judicial institutions. We will place strong pressure on them. We will not obey our human rights obligations, our treaty obligations, the courts that we've signed up to in the United Nations. We will not obey any of these things that we promised that we do. These so-called conservative states. So WikiLeaks is a conservative institution.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Espero recebê-lo no Brasil em liberdade e num Brasil democrático. Muito obrigado.
Thanks.